but just a quick technical note. Everybody is on mute just to make sure that people's computers don't have feedback, etc. Please continue to keep yourself on mute. And we are going to go ahead and get started with Sean.
Hello, thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Sean Malloy. I'm a member of the Pennsylvania State Democratic Committee from Allegheny County, and I am the chair of the Pennsylvania Dems LGBTQ Caucus. By day, I'm the senior political director of the LGBTQ Victory Fund, where I work to help get openly LGBTQ people elected up and down the ballot. I'm so excited to be here today at this event for Josh Shapiro because he really is a great attorney general. And in this moment, we need great attorney generals, and he needs to be reelected. He's consistently risen above politics and actually defends Pennsylvanians from predatory attacks of banks, big corporations, and even the president of the United States. I actually just told Josh that I actually had a consumer complaint that I thought would never actually end up being addressed, but his office helped find a resolution and was just absolutely professional. I think that's a true testament to the department that he runs and the vision he has, and exactly why we need to re-elect him. But while I could go on a long time about Josh, I'm here to welcome our special guest. I first heard about Pete Buttigieg, also known as Mayor Pete, when working at the Democratic National Committee. He was a rising star in the Midwest who came out as gay and got overwhelmingly re-elected. And after that, there were rumors that he wanted to run for president. I got to know him after he ran for the chairmanship of the DNC. We were on opposite sides then, but he called up Victory Fund and said, I'm going to run for president. And I said, wow. And we knew he had the skill set, the tenacity, and clear talent to make him the first viable LGBTQ candidate for president. We were so excited to see him win in Iowa and make history. And it's been just a pleasure seeing him connect with so many Americans, be an amazing leader, and someone who is clearly going to have an amazing future. I'm so excited to welcome Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Well, thanks so much, Sean. Thanks for your work in the party. Thanks for your work for the LGBTQ community, and a big thanks for everything that the Victory Fund has done at such an important time. I'm really pleased to be teaming up with you tonight, with everybody on the call, to support Josh Shapiro for re-election in Pennsylvania. After the presidential campaign ended for me, I was so proud of what we had been able to build in terms of an extraordinary community of supporters committed to values that brought us together, and an understanding that this was not just about what happens in this election, but really how the elections at hand are going to define, in a way that I think happens once in a generation, the era to come. And so we quickly came together to put together a political action committee, as well as a 501c4 organization called Win the Era. The idea was to take those same values that animated our campaign and make sure we were backing causes and candidates that mattered. I'm all in for Joe Biden. I'm doing an event for him later this evening. We also know, though, that it would be a terrible mistake to treat the presidency like the only office that matters. And that's especially true at a moment like this, where we're seeing, in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of the outcry over systemic racism in this country, just how much it is state and it is local leaders who are on the lead in so many ways. And so with the limited number of candidates, as we scan the entire country for who we should have in our round of inaugural endorsements,
I know.
A handful.
I can tell you, I've been donating a lot to Joe.
And Josh Shapiro. And I'll tell you why. First of all, again, we need to be paying attention to offices like Attorney General that are playing such a critical role in defending the rule of law across the country. I wish the US Attorney General was doing this, but we know better. Josh Shapiro, from the Office of Attorney General for the people of Pennsylvania, has stood up for citizens that have faced addiction to opioids, and stood up against those who were responsible wrongfully for their addiction. He has stood up for students being defrauded by for-profit colleges. And he's been in a position that I think no state attorney general expected they would be called to do, which is to defend the law against the President of the United States. Never attention seeking, but always seeking to do the right thing for the people he serves. He represents also, I think, an approach to politics. If you just look at the fact that he was able to carry the state of Pennsylvania during that same disastrous election for our country, when so many looking for anything that would send a message voted for Donald Trump. Many of those same voters voted for Josh Shapiro, not because he was pretending to be more conservative than he is, but because he was straightforward, because he understood the importance of listening, because he knew how to reach out both in reliably democratic communities, in conservative communities, and in places like the places where we campaigned when I was running for president that really could go whichever way they hear somebody who appears to be listening to them. That is exactly the approach to politics that we're going to need to build up our party, but also to move our country forward, to win elections and to effectively govern. And Josh Shapiro is a great example of that, and a generational leader who I think will be shaping American politics in the era to come. So it's very important to me to be supporting his reelection. And I want to thank everyone on this call for chipping in to make sure that we're all doing our part, because it is one of the races that I think will resonate across the country, as it did when he got elected in the first place in 2016. And if you haven't heard him speak, if you haven't seen him in action, I think you'll see by the end of this time we have together right now why it's so important that we support his reelection. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to turn it over to Josh Shapiro to share what he's been able to achieve and where he sees the road ahead.
Well, Pete, thank you so much for those thoughtful words and those kind words. And Sean, let me also thank you so much for the kind introduction and for the good work you do every single day across this Commonwealth and this country, especially the good work you've done for Pete. And, you know, I'm honored, frankly, to have the support of Pete Buttigieg, to be one of the handful of candidates from across the country that Win the Era believes in. And, you know, when Pete Buttigieg exited the presidential stage, he didn't go home and lick his wounds, and he didn't retreat. He advanced by starting Win the Era and by saying that, yeah, it's important that we elect Joe Biden. God knows it is. And Pete and I are going to do everything we can to elect Joe Biden. But we've got to elect people who think like us, people who are progressive and pragmatic and recognize that the elections are a vehicle to deliver on the governmental change that is so needed, that we've got to make sure that those races up and down the ballot are thought about and funded and taken care of. And so to have Pete's support means a lot to me. And I will say, to have all the Team Pete folks who are on this call tonight, who have chipped in, that means a lot. I see a bunch of y'all waving there. So thank you. And I think I know you through Twitter, and I know you through social media, and I can't wait till we are out of this pandemic and we're in a place where we can all get together again personally. But to have your support, the kind of people that fueled Pete's not just win in Iowa, but transformational campaign, join ours, means a ton. So I thank you all so much for your generosity. You know, when I ran for election the first time around for state rep, my campaign manager's on this call. I noticed my sister, Rebecca, she's the only one that would take the job because I was running a district that had been held by Republicans forever. We had no shot of winning. Very few people were investing in us. I actually haven't shared this with too many people. We got a poll back on Labor Day, Pete. It had me down 65-21. My wife said, that's not good. I was like, no, that's really, really bad. But you know what we did? We went out and personally, I knocked on 18,000 doors. And I learned after, you know, maybe the second or third 100 doors, it wasn't about what I said at the door. It was about whether or not I was listening when I showed up at the door. And in every race I've won, whether it was flipping Montgomery County in southeastern Pennsylvania blue for the first time in 150 years, or becoming the people's lawyer as the attorney general back in 2016. The power of showing up and listening and letting people know that you're there to fight for them, that's what our politics has to be about. Hell, that's what Pete did in Iowa, and that's why he won there and why he's going to continue to be a transformational figure in our politics, because he listened. And I think it's important that we listen, as my mom says, listen with your heart. And that's something that I think is missing in our politics today. It's what I've tried to do since I've gotten the opportunity to serve as the people's lawyer in Pennsylvania, to listen to the students who got screwed by the for-profit college, and not just go out and shut down the for-profit college, but actually deliver $50 million back in the pockets of those same students that got hurt, taking on the big banks and the predatory lenders who were taking advantage of people who can't afford to get lawyers and who every day get hurt in our system. Standing up for people who are oftentimes living in the shadows, like the survivors of childhood sexual abuse. There are thousands of adults in Pennsylvania today who were abused as children by predator priests who now are believed, who now can get some semblance of their life back because of the work we and the grand jurors did to highlight the abuse that occurred. To stand up to Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, who actually wants to make it harder for people on campus right now to fight back against sexual abuse, making sure those survivors are always listened to and always heard and always fought for. Taking on the big fights that oftentimes government officials just say are too hard to solve. You know, if you're from Western Pennsylvania, you've heard of those two big healthcare giants, Highmark and UPMC. After a decade of governors and attorneys general trying, we got those parties in the room. And as a result of our work today, 2.3 million Western Pennsylvanians now have access to their doctors, now can walk into the hospital of their choosing. Just last week, we called out the fracking companies who for so many years were the untouchables in Pennsylvania. We called them out for violating the law criminally. Criminally, we charged them. And we said that Article 1, Section 27 of our Pennsylvania Constitution, which guarantees you the right to clean air and pure water, actually means something in Pennsylvania. We're trying to make our communities safe by standing up, even in this state that has a rich history and heritage of gun ownership, and taking on the NRA and dealing with gun violence in our communities. Battling the opioid epidemic, which claims the lives of 12 Pennsylvanians every day. And by the way, not just by locking up a dealer on the street corner, but holding the very people accountable who started this crisis. The greedy executives who were in pharmaceutical company boardrooms, who lied about their opioid product, got people hooked, and left us with what we're facing today in the Commonwealth. Now, listen, when I signed up for this gig and talked about, you know, holding people accountable and looking out for the rule of law and protecting all Pennsylvanians, no matter what you look like or where you come from or who you love or who you pray to, never did I think I'd have to sue the president of the United States to protect your rights. But that's exactly what we've done. And as a result of our lawsuits, 5,889 dreamers in Pennsylvania today are protected because we took our case to the Supreme Court and won. Women still have access to contraception today because I sued the president and we won victories in court. Our LGBTQ brothers and sisters are protected because of lawsuits we brought against this president and won. Look, when I think back to 2016, Donald Trump won by about 44,000 votes, and I won by about 250,000 votes in Pennsylvania. I won not by compromising my views or my vision, but I won because I showed up in communities like Pete did and listened, letting people know that they were going to have a fighter for them, letting people know they'd have a champion, letting people know that they were respected. That's the model Pete laid out in Iowa, and it's the model that candidates across this country have to follow in 2020 if we're going to win again. I wouldn't trust the polls, and I wouldn't trust the pundits on TV. I'd trust the voices that you hear in those communities, and people have to show up and listen, and that's what I'm doing. And look, to run these campaigns, to show up and listen, and to communicate, it isn't free. And so to have you pitch in a few bucks to help us along the way and do that, and to have Pete Buttigieg put his stamp of approval on this campaign, man, that means the world to me. I know you've got a lot of demands on you and your time, all of you, and your resources, particularly as we deal with this pandemic, particularly as we deal with so many people out of work and struggling. The fact that you're willing to part with your time and your resources to support me in my reelection bid is truly humbling, and I'm grateful, and I thank you for that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda, and I'm sure Pete and I would be happy to answer some questions.
Great. Okay, we have a handful of questions that we've pre-selected, so we'll go ahead and let those folks ask you directly. Elizabeth Shea, do you want to start?
You're muted. You're muted.
Good. Okay. Hey, Josh.
There.
Thank you so much. It's so great to hear your words, and my whole family is just so supportive of you and your campaign. And Mayor Pete, we love you too. Just really love you. So my question is, would you both please comment on how the Democratic Party will handle the rise of anti-Semitism in the country?
Pete, you want to go first on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's so important for us to be unequivocal, forceful, clear, and as is always important for leadership, draw just the brightest lines around the boundaries of what's acceptable. And anti-Semitism needs to be named, it needs to be called out, and we need to make clear that it has no place on any end of the political spectrum in this country, especially as we've seen the frightening rise in incidents and in rhetoric that have become all too common. So I think it falls to each of us, anybody with a platform, anybody with a voice, to state what ought to go without saying, but we just can't take that for granted. And this is not just a matter of historical recollection, it's a burning here and now kind of issue. And one that each of us has an opportunity, whether we see it online or whether we see it around us, or even when we see anti-Semitic ideas and figures welcomed into the halls of power, to speak up and do something about that. But I know this is personal for Josh, so eager to hear how you approach this too.
No, look, I appreciate that answer very much. And here's what I would say: leaders, all leaders, not just leaders who occupy government positions, but leaders must speak and act with moral clarity. And words matter. Look, hate speech begets hate crimes. I felt that when I stood outside the Tree of Life synagogue in the hours after the massacre there in Pittsburgh. When you see the president, for example, say some of the hateful, racist things that he says every day, we in law enforcement see the effect of that online, in the areas that we follow for, threats of violence and things like that. He either speaks in a way that is directly racist, or in some cases, what's more dangerous is when he and other leaders who lack moral clarity allow their words to be misappropriated by those who would like to use that to stoke fear and division and worse, hate crimes in our communities, particularly against American Jews. We can't allow that. And I would say that each of us has a responsibility to do our part, to call it out when you see it on your timelines, on Facebook or wherever, and to vote in this election for people who can speak and act with that level of moral clarity.
Great. Okay, next up, we have Aiden Levinson. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Mayor Pete and Josh. My question is, what do you see as the top 3 issues in your race and attorney general races across the nation?
Well, look, for me personally, we've got to continue to reform our system. We didn't talk a lot about it here in this setting yet, but our criminal justice system is in need of real reform. And I've been proud to lead many efforts here in Pennsylvania because, as I said before, the rule of law must apply fairly to all, no matter what you look like, where you come from, who you love, or who you pray to or choose not to pray to. And so it's got to be central to everything else we do. It's the foundation upon which we build everything. For me, also, continuing to just serve as the people's lawyer, the people's AG. I see so many people across Pennsylvania who can't afford a lawyer, who get screwed day in and day out. I visited with a bunch of landowners up in Bradford County. If you haven't been there, it's all the way up at the top of our state. The fracking companies came in, asked if they could drill on their land. The people finally had the opportunity to make some money, and they said yes. And those fracking companies then extracted all the natural gas and screwed them out of their royalty payments. And you know who their lawyer is? I am. And I'm going to get them their money from these fracking companies. And there's example after example like that, where I get to serve as the people's lawyer. And that's just an incredible honor. And then I think, fundamentally, we've got to make our community safer. I touched on 2 of the biggest issues, gun violence and the opioid crisis. that has to be, the work that continues in the Attorney General's office. As for the work across the country, my colleagues and I work very well together on a whole host of consumer issues and rights issues. And look, hopefully we won't have to be joining together to sue our president. Hopefully we'll have a president that respects the rule of law. We may not always agree on every issue, but that should be at the core foundation of what we do. I think Pete probably has a perspective on these races from his travels across the country, and I'd love to hear what he has to say.
I won't add much because I think you hit it on the head. And one of the reasons why we chose this Attorney General race to focus on is that I think the way that Josh thinks about and talks about this really is a model. And whether it's confronting, as our country must, racial injustice, where the rule of law is really the cutting edge, both of where harm has been done because of the history with law enforcement in our country, and where justice can be served. Whether it's, as he mentioned, keeping our communities safe, whether it's from opioids or from gun violence. I know Mayor Christine Hunchowski's on the line, who guided her community of Parkland through its tragedy that has happened in so many, from the Tree of Life Synagogue to so many other parts of, whether it's Pennsylvania, Indiana, or elsewhere. It matters. Who is the people's lawyer in moments like that? And the broader concept of the rule of law, hopefully in concert with a Biden administration in the future. But no matter who is standing in the way of justice, whether it is a company, whether it's an individual, or even if it's the president, we need state attorneys general who are not afraid to stand up for the people against whoever stands in the way of justice. And those are the qualities that I see on display in Pennsylvania, and hope we can continue to support across the country.
And Pete, I'm glad you mentioned the mayor, who's doing great work in Parkland. I know another Win the Era candidate. She represents my good friend Fred Gutenberg, who we worked together on a number of gun violence issues. But I also want to give a shout out to Christy Ganibas, who our Congresswoman from the Erie area up in northwestern Pennsylvania. And if you haven't paid attention to Christy yet, all of you on this call, she really deserves your support. And Center County Commissioner Mike Pipe is on here as well. He's been a great leader. He flipped Center County, where Penn State is. He flipped that blue years ago.
Great. Okay, Eva has a question up next. Go ahead.
Well, first, I want to say what a huge honor it is to be Zooming with the Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I went out to New Hampshire on your behalf. I have my hat right here, but rest be assured I have my Biden mask as well. And I'm super excited to be supporting Attorney General Josh Shapiro's reelection. It's really the best lineup for tonight. And I'm glad that you're in this fight. And so a question to Attorney General Josh Shapiro, what are you doing currently in the fight for reproductive choice?
Well, Eva, thanks. And by the way, Pete, when I bumped into Eva the other day at my daughter's graduation, and I said, Eva, you should come to this event that I'm having, she was not that enthused until I said Pete would be there. And then she began to get very, very excited. So I'm very glad that you could be here and see Pete with your own eyes. So look, every day I'm fighting to protect women's reproductive rights. And we are literally waiting right now for a ruling from the United States Supreme Court. I sued the president. If you remember back right when he took office, he tried to do away with the Affordable Care Act, if you recall. And when he failed to do that, he signed one of those big executive orders that he loves to sign. They're typically illegal, but he uses that big Sharpie pen. And one of those executive orders was to take away women's access to contraception, which is a right under the Affordable Care Act. We sued. We've won in multiple courts. We argued the case before the United States Supreme Court because the president just simply won't give up on this. And I'm hopeful for a good ruling. Everybody cross your fingers. We should know in the next few days. That's one of the many cases. You saw the case just last week, about the Louisiana, access to abortion case. We were involved in that case as an amicus, and we're going to continue to do everything we can. It is central to who I am. I'm proud that I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood in every single election I've ever run in. I've never had a problem standing up, by the way, in any community in Pennsylvania, saying that I support not just women's reproductive rights, but abortion rights. And I think it's important that we call it out.
Thanks. And, the best thing that obviously I can do and ask our team of supporters to do is to support candidates like Josh Shapiro, who've been so clear on this issue. But also, thanks for hitting the road for our campaign. I appreciate the support, and it means a lot to me that you're part of this too.
Great. Okay, Scott Gratson, go ahead.
First, thank you so much for allowing me to speak. And I am truly impressed by your words of inclusion. Listening to both Mayor Pete as well as Josh. I am particularly interested in how your message of inclusion is going to transfer into policies concerning the empowerment of Black women and the LGBTQ community in Pennsylvania.
Sure, Scott. Look, I can tell you that it starts by making sure you have diversity within your own ranks. We have a number of LGBTQ brothers and sisters sitting around not just the big tables in my office making decisions, but the small tables as well, the ones where the big decisions get made. And I will tell you that is important to me, because I think we have to make sure that everyone gets a seat at the table, and that the oath of office I took to represent all Pennsylvanians is reflected not just in my views and values, but the people I surround myself with. I think it also changes the culture of an office when the folks are hiring, the folks at maybe the lower rungs of the ladder working their way up, they see people at the top rungs who look like them. They see people at the top rungs that have similar life experiences. I think that's really important in a governmental sense. And then in a political sense, I think it's important that we elevate candidates here in Pennsylvania and all across this country who look like and represent all of the different people across this country. Pete?
Yeah, one of the things that I was most moved by during the course of our campaign were stories of people who had so much to tell in terms of what they had done to empower themselves and others. And one really important part of the certainly the LGBTQ experience is allyship, right? My right to marry came not only from standing on the shoulders of people like me, but also people not like me who stood at our side. And I think within an internally diverse community, we should bear that in mind. It's why a white gay man like me needs to be there for Black trans women as they face an epidemic of violence. And it's something to remember at a moment like this that also calls for allies when it comes to the empowerment of Black Americans. This cannot be regarded as a specialty issue, and no one can be asked to bear that burden of change alone. So much of what has to change is actually among white Americans and among institutions dominated by white Americans. So we need to look in every one of these places if we want to make good on principles like what was in the Frederick Douglass plan that was such an important part of our campaign about the economic empowerment alongside things like criminal justice reform, things like electoral reform. All of these things are so intimately connected, and everyone needs to understand that this issue is personal, whether you identify with a particular group that has been marginalized, or whether you might be on the other side, the benefiting side of that equation of disempowerment, because we can't go on like this and be the America that we know we could be.
Great. We have 2 more questions here tonight, guys. Nicholas is up next.
Hi, Mayor Buttigieg and Attorney General Shapiro. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for your work. My name is Nicholas Christos, and I recently graduated high school. It is such an honor to speak with you today. In what ways do you think the criminal justice system in the United States needs to be reformed, and how could this get done?
Look, I'll just say it needs to be reformed in so many different ways. Look, fundamentally, if you've got people within your jurisdiction, in my case, the state, who feel as though their rights are going to be trampled on, their rights aren't going to be respected because of what they look like, then before we even get to the policy prescriptions, we have failed. And I think we have to be very honest about that. And as the chief law enforcement officer of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I've been very upfront about that in trying to usher in a real change in attitude and real reform. It starts with me, right? We changed our entire leadership structure in our agent corps within the AG's office. We train differently. We talk openly about things like implicit bias. we're very, very serious as a law enforcement agency in setting a new standard, a new tone for others to emulate. And then as we look at specific policies that need to change, I kind of run it through a two-part test, Nicholas, right? One is the community, those that are peacefully and righteously protesting, are they calling out for this change? And then two, Nicholas, is it really going to bring about change that impacts the foundational issues, those trust issues that we need to address? Because here's the thing, if it's not really going to solve a problem, I'm really not interested in just making noise or putting out a press release or a tweet. I really want to solve it. Case in point, people are saying we need more transparency in the hiring process for police officers to make sure that we have good police officers in the community, right? How do we do that? Well, we've been advancing legislation, and it's going to be on the governor's desk next week. We'll be the first state to advance something in the wake of George Floyd's killing. We've moved very quickly on this to create a centralized database so that all of the information is going to be is going to be available to that department when an officer is trying to go from Department A to Department B. The record is going to follow them. That level of transparency is going to help cure a lot of ills in our system. It is a down payment on the kind of change we need to make to repair and reform our criminal justice system. Pete, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we need in AG offices around the country. Look, it's not enough for public defenders to be justice-minded, although that's critically important. It's not enough for advocates who are pressing for change to be justice-minded. This also has to be the mentality of people who are guiding law enforcement itself. And that's something that certainly is on display in Attorney General Shapiro's office. This is something that moves through policing, through the way that we establish police accountability. A lot of times it's the kind of transparency that he's talking about, but it's also making sure that we're moving forward with the kinds of practices that are encouraged, because attorneys general have a unique ability to reach into agencies, large and small, and help them level up in terms of their standards. As one advocate put it, raising the floor of what is acceptable and raising the ceiling of what is possible. And we need that right alongside the broader systemic reforms. Look, as long as Black Americans are systemically, economically disempowered, we will see that play out in the space of law enforcement. So we can't expect this only to be a question of the criminal legal system in order to have full and complete justice. But we know we got to begin there because there's so much work to be done, whether it's specifically around policing, whether it's around some of the laws themselves, or around making sure they're applied more equitably.
Last but not least, we have Julia McGrath with the final question for this evening.
Hi, I wanted to ask you to talk about mail-in ballots, which we're seeing as such an important point of access to the polls lately, but they definitely have their downsides. And in Pennsylvania, it took us over a week to count election results for some of our elections this past primary. So I wanted you to talk about the impact that may have on us in November.
I think this is really urgent. On one hand, we need to be vigilant about the conduct of the elections and push back on any kind of voter suppression or allowing anything to happen, whether it's by neglect or by intention, that makes it harder for people to vote. And it's one of the reasons why I believe there ought to be universal access to voting by mail or voting from home. But also that shouldn't come at the expense of making sure there remains safe means for in-person voting, so that nobody gets disfranchised. And this leads to a couple of things that I don't think are being talked about enough. One, we need more poll workers. So in addition to believing that there needs to be legal protection and vigilance around the conduct of elections, one of the reasons Milwaukee went from 175 polling places to 6 or 5 last time around was just that, look, in this country, for better or for worse, elections are run mostly by volunteers working under county and state authorities. And those volunteers are mostly, actually get paid a little bit, it's like jury duty, but they're mostly retirees. And that's going to be a real problem in the pandemic era. So one concrete thing you can do if you're saying, I really care about how the elections are going to go, but I'm not a trained lawyer who can go be part of an election protection effort, that's something more of us should be stepping up to do. The other thing that you mentioned that's important is we really want to make sure elections are run as efficiently and swiftly as possible. And I would argue that I have as much to say as anybody in the country about some of the frustrations of not getting election results the day that you were expecting them, based on our experience in Iowa.
Right.
But This time around, we should remember, especially if this president and others lose and try to attack the legitimacy of our process, that if there's a lot of voting by mail and it takes a little while for the results to come in, that might be a sign of people actually doing their job. And we're going to have to go through a big and difficult adjustment in expectations, because the simple reality is, if we do a good job as a country and make it possible for everybody to vote from home, it is very likely that we will not have immediate results the same night of the election. And I'm not sure we're prepared for that. So we got to start getting ourselves and each other ready.
That's a great point. Well, Julie, I'm glad you raised this issue. It's something I've spent a lot of time on. And first off, it is the safest and most secure way to vote during a pandemic. And sadly, I think because of the failed leadership from the president and the realities of science and medicine, we're probably going to be battling this pandemic come the fall. And so for all of you, I want you to be able to stay safe, but still play your role in our democracy and be able to vote by mail. It is safe, it is secure, and your vote will be counted. I'll also say that Democrats got that and understood that. In the primary, Pete, 3 out of every 4 mail-in ballots that were requested by Democrats. Just a huge number. And I think the Democratic Party here in Pennsylvania deserves an immense amount of credit for the work that they did to get those ballots returned. Now, when it comes to 2020 in November, understand, and I want to be very clear about this, and I'm saying this as a lawyer. I'm saying this as your lawyer. Donald Trump is doing everything in his power to disenfranchise voters, to make it harder for your vote to be counted. Case in point, the Trump campaign and the RNC, Pete, they just filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania last week that I, as the Attorney General, am defending against, to make sure that people who send in their mail-in ballots, people who drop those mail-in ballots off in a drop box, that those votes count. They're actually going to court right now in Pennsylvania, one of arguably the 3 most important states in terms of determining the outcome of the presidency, and trying to predetermine that certain votes won't be counted, even though the good people of Pennsylvania will have done everything by the book and done everything right. So I'm telling you, as your lawyer, I'm in court right now trying to stop Donald Trump from stealing this election. I think the point Pete made at the end, which we have to be talking more about and get more focused on, is, as these poll workers do their jobs, we may not, have a call by 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. Look, God willing, it's such a blowout that we will, and it won't matter. But if it's close, it's going to take some time. And I think we all need to sort of gird ourselves for that. We also have to get the narrative out there that a sign of this taking an extra 24, 48 hours actually is a sign that the integrity of the election is intact, not the opposite, as Donald Trump would have you believe. We've got to be alarmed about what he's doing in Pennsylvania, in these lawsuits that he's filing and presumably will file in other key states around the country. We got to do everything in our power to fight back. I'm confident that the Biden campaign will do its part. Obviously, Pete's going to do his part, and the DNC will do theirs. And I can tell you, as your lawyer, I'll do mine.
That's it for the Q&A. I think we're going to wrap here.
Well, I'll say a quick word, and I want to give Pete the final word. I'm humbled by all of you being here. Thank you so much for your generosity. To the folks who have been with me every step of the way since I knocked on those 18,000 doors back in Abington, I'm blessed to have your continued support. And for those of you who I'm just meeting because Pete sent out an email to his list and said, take a chance on this guy from Pennsylvania, I'm so grateful and so indebted to you and thankful. I really appreciate it. And finally, to Pete, not for being here and giving me your time, but for creating Win the Era and believing that I and the Mayor of Parkland and others can be a part of your vision for the future. So thank you so much. And Pete, the floor is yours.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you for your leadership and echo those thanks to everybody on this call, especially some of the Win the Era faithful who I am seeing show up again and again every time we ask you to pay attention to a really compelling race somewhere in the country. And as I believe you've seen just now, this is absolutely one of them. We need Josh Shapiro in that office, helping to lead the way, not just for the people of Pennsylvania, but really helping to set an example of what forward-thinking leadership in law can look like, and to be a partner in change with President Joe Biden and a lot of other great people we're going to elect around the country. So thank you for taking interest in this race. Thank you for your generosity and chipping in. Please keep doing what you can. Races don't get any less expensive, even when they're happening over the Zoomosphere like these are. And can't wait for us to have a lot to celebrate come election night. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.